Hello and welcome to today's Learn at Lunchtime program from the State Museum of Pennsylvania. I am Beth Erickson. The topic today is Pennsylvania elk, past, present, and future. And with us is Ben Porkolab, Conservation Education Coordinator with Keystone Elk Country Alliance. Ben supervises the education department at the Elk Country Visitors Center located in Benazet, Pennsylvania. Ben is passionate about sharing his love for the outdoors by educating people of all ages and from all walks of life. Welcome, Ben, and thank you for presenting today's program.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be on.
So tell us a bit about yourself and the work you do at Elk Country Visitors Center.
Thanks, Beth. So my name is Ben Porkolab. I am the Conservation Education Coordinator here at the Elk Country Visitor Center in Benazet, Pennsylvania, which is found in Elk County. The township of Benazet has more elk living in it than people. A little bit about myself. So I grew up in the middle of the Allegheny National Forest, and I grew up an outdoorsman. I grew up loving the outdoors and everything that went along with it. I went to Indiana University of Pennsylvania and got my elementary education teaching degree. I taught 2 years teaching in Alaska, 1 year teaching in Nevada, and then 19 years teaching in Cameron County in the small town of Emporium. I've been the education coordinator here at the Elk Country Visitor Center for the Keystone Elk Country Alliance for 7 years, and I have found it to be a very good fit for myself, being that I love to teach people of all ages, but I specifically like to teach people about those things that I am passionate about, such as the outdoors and wildlife.
Well, I'm excited to hear your presentation to learn more. So let me remind the audience that by participating in this webinar, you're consenting to the recording, retention, and use of this webinar. If at any time you have a comment, place it in the chat and we'll respond as soon as we can. If you have a question, place it in the Q&A and Ben will respond to questions after the presentation is complete. So a reminder, just by doing so, you're consenting to the recording, retention, and use of your statements as part of this webinar. So without further wait, let's get started.
Wonderful. Thanks again. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the organization that I work for, the Keystone Elk Country Alliance. We are a 501c3 nonprofit wildlife organization. We operate, manage, and staff the Elk Country Visitor Center, which is owned by the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources in Pennsylvania. We have a 35-year lease to do so, and it is a wonderful opportunity. And if you've never been here before, I highly recommend for you to make the trip. So the Keystone Elk Country Alliance, like I said, is a 501c3 nonprofit. And we are very similar to other wildlife organizations that do good for wildlife. Our mission is to conserve and enhance Pennsylvania's elk country for future generations. And we do that three ways that we accomplish that mission. Our number one priority is conservation education, which makes me, being a teacher of many, many years, extremely happy. Last year alone, we taught over 39,000 people. We do that through field trips here at the Elk Country Visitor Center. People of all ages come here for field trips and they want to learn primarily about elk. So a lot of our programs do revolve around Pennsylvania's elk herd, but we also teach about other Pennsylvania wildlife species, as well as tree identification and outdoor recreation and all of those things. So if you're ever interested in what's happening here, you can jump on our website, experienceelkcountry.com. and you can see what weekend programs we have. So not only do we have field trips, but we also have public education weekend programs every Saturday and Sunday, usually at 2 o'clock. And they range from, like I said, elk to bears to maple syruping to rattlesnakes to looking for antlers. So you can check that out. The other thing that we do, we have a wonderful distance learning program that we teach through Zoom. It is very, very similar to the program that you are a part of today. And the great thing about that is we can teach people no matter their location. So through this program, we've actually educated folks of all ages as far as Florida and California, 18 other states as well. And we've also educated people in all 67 counties in Pennsylvania. So that's a wonderful program. We also have an internship program that we partner with Penn State Du Bois. We have fall interns here every year, and they are studying wildlife technology down there in Du Bois with the Penn State Wildlife Program. Our second priority is habitat enhancement, and that is within Pennsylvania's elk range. So Pennsylvania's elk range is actually quite large, larger than people think, and we work very hard to improve the habitat for elk in Pennsylvania within that range. Last year, we were able to enhance over 500 acres of elk habitat. Sometimes that just means keeping a field by mowing it or brush hogging it. Other times it may require lime or fertilizer. And then there are other times when we will actually plant some of those things that elk love to eat, such as different types of grasses and forbs. And then, of course, you have to make sure that you take care of them in the years to follow. Our third priority is permanent land protection. So elk are large animals. They require a lot of space, and they require land that is undeveloped by people, which is why most of the elk live in the western states. There's a lot less people, and there's a lot more public ground that is protected from being developed. So we have our elk herd here in Pennsylvania in the north central part of the state, and that is exactly why. It is because 80% of the elk range is public ground, being state parks, state forest, state game lands, and national forest. And also that there's not a lot of people living in this part of the state because there's not a lot of private ground, which is exactly what the elk need. Elk eat a lot, elk cover a large area, and they can be very destructive, especially with if they get into farmers' fields or things like that. I'm going to go ahead and carry on, everybody. This slide, of course, is of the United States, and we are right here in north central Pennsylvania, Elk County, Benezet, Pennsylvania, population less than 400 people. And if you've never been in this part of the state, I highly recommend that you make the trip, depending on where you're coming from. Beautiful place in the Allegheny Mountains with the Appalachian Mountain chain, of course. And this is where you can find the Elk Country Visitor Center as well as Pennsylvania's elk herd. So this map, of course, portrays all 67 counties in Pennsylvania. We are right here in Elk County. Elk County got its name because it was the last place in Pennsylvania to have native elk. Yes, elk were native to Pennsylvania. It was the Eastern Woodland Elk, and at one time, there were elk found in all parts of Pennsylvania, and at one time, there was actually over 100,000 Eastern Woodland Elk living in our state. This is a short video that we took with the drone here of the Elk Country Visitor Center. I'm flying you in from the parking lot area. I want you to notice not only that this is a beautiful facility, but I also want you to notice the vegetation, how green and lush it is here. Lots of trees, lots of forest, lots of undeveloped land, like I said, which is exactly what the elk need. As we go up the sidewalk here, you're going to notice the front of the building. Our building was finished in 2010. Like I said, it is owned by Pennsylvania DCNR, and we have a 35-year lease to operate, manage, and staff the center, as well as the 250 acres that surround the center. We have also planted some wonderful habitat for the elk in these fields, which is a prime location for people to come and to see the elk, primarily during early morning and late evening hours. Also within the Elk Country Visitor Center, we have a wonderful gift shop with only USA-made products. We have interactive touchscreens, which are great for education of all ages, many beautiful wildlife mounts. We also have a 4D theater here that not only engages visual learning, but there are also audio, there is also smells during the movie, and there's also some things that you may feel during the movie. So this is a great production if you have an interest about learning more about Pennsylvania's elk herd, and it's great for all ages. Outside, we have hiking trails, we have viewing areas. Like I said, if you want to come see Pennsylvania's elk herd, the key is to be here early in the morning or late in the evening. They are crepuscular animals, which means they're most active during those hours. Okay, I'm going to take you back in time. This is one of our historic elk that is no longer with us. It is extinct. It was known as the Irish elk. It lived thousands of years ago, and it lived during the Pleistocene era, which was the same time period when the woolly mammoth roamed the earth. They were massive, weighing up to 1,500 pounds, and their antlers being up to 12 feet wide. At the end of that time period, there was an ice age. Snow and ice, of course, covered the earth. The Irish elk was an herbivore, eating only plants and plant materials. Therefore, they died out due to starvation during that ice age. This scale gives you an idea of just how large they were in comparison to a human, a moose, and a deer. Like I said, the Irish elk is gone. They got their name, the Irish elk, because we have found most of their remains in the country of Ireland. And yes, people are still uncovering skeletons, bones, fossils today. Now I'm going to share with you another historic elk, also extinct. We like to highlight this elk with people because it had a very peculiar, strange adaptation for survival. That being its long, sharp canines. So, the prehistoric elk had 4 to 6 inch long canines. They were made of ivory. Elk today do not grow long, sharp canines. However, they do still grow top canines, and they are made of ivory. So, here's a skull. This elk died of old age a few years ago, and you can see those top canines that I'm referring to. Today, however, they do not grow long and sharp. Scientists think that these long, sharp canines were used either for protection, perhaps they had more predators, or they may have been an omnivore needing these to catch animals, catch their prey. Today, elk are herbivores. So let's talk about elk that are still living on our planet today. If we were to travel to Europe or Asia, countries such as Ireland and Scotland, we may see European red deer, also known as the red stag. Their populations are very healthy in many places of the world today. These European red deer are the ancestors of the elk that live in North America today. They came across the Bering Strait land bridge about 10,000 years ago from Europe and Asia into North America, and then over time, they dispersed and spread out into different parts of our continent. Depending on the different habitats and the different climates, they evolved and changed and became different subspecies of elk. This map shows you where elk are living in the United States today. All of the red shows you where elk are found. Here is our herd. Here is our herd right here in north central Pennsylvania. You see most of the elk are in the western states, and Colorado is the state that has the most elk. These other herds on the East Coast that you see were all herds that were introduced after their native species were wiped out or eradicated, Pennsylvania being one of them. Pennsylvania was the first state to bring elk back to the East Coast. This slide shows you the 6 subspecies of elk that were found in the United States at one time. 2 of them are now extinct, that being the Merriam elk and the Eastern Woodland Elk. That Eastern Woodland Elk is that native species of elk that once thrived in our state of Pennsylvania. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about what happened. Like I said, at one time, there were many elk living in our state. Due to habitat loss and overhunting, with the colonization, with the development of our state, with the Europeans coming over and building roads, towns, cities, and developing the land, that was the beginning of the end for the Eastern Woodland Elk. The best way for me to describe it is with the growth of the population of people in our state, the decrease of the Eastern Woodland Elk took place. There was a thing back then called market hunting. Market hunting was when hunters could hunt every day. They could kill as many animals as they wanted. Then they could sell that meat to restaurants. Elk meat is very good, and an elk provides a lot of meat. A lot of market hunters were selling elk, Eastern Woodland Elk, to fancy restaurants in New York City and Baltimore for top dollar. So in other words, for a market hunter, an elk was a large paycheck. The last Eastern Woodland Elk was killed right here in Pennsylvania, in Elk County, Pennsylvania, in the year 1867. And then we did not have any elk in our state for about 50 years. One other thing I'd like to mention, this Eastern Woodland Elk was once found all the way from Maine down to Georgia along the Appalachian Mountain chain. That elk killed in Elk County in 1867 was the last of its kind. Today in Pennsylvania, we have Rocky Mountain elk, thanks to the Pennsylvania Game Commission. The Pennsylvania Game Commission was established in 1895, and one of their first projects, one of their first goals, was to bring elk back to Pennsylvania because they were a native species here. So, from 1913 to 1926, the Pennsylvania Game Commission went out west and live trapped 177 Rocky Mountain elk in the states of South Dakota, Wyoming, and Colorado, and they brought them back to Pennsylvania in shipments. Like I said, this was a 13-year process, and then they released them in different locations of Pennsylvania. This old-time photo shows you members of the Pennsylvania Game Commission releasing a cow elk, a female elk, from the western states in our great state of Pennsylvania. This picture is about 100 years old. You can see that this wagon that held this elk was being pulled by a horse. This photo was actually taken in the upper reaches of Hicks Run, if you are familiar with the area. This is the logo of the Pennsylvania Game Commission. They are our state agency that manage all the birds and mammals in our state. And I can honestly say they do a tremendous job with our elk herd today. So this map shows you where the elk are found in Pennsylvania today. The red line is the elk range. It includes parts of 10 counties, and it is slowly growing. If we were to look at a map from 40 years ago, you would have seen that there were only elk in 2 or 3 counties. Today, like I said, the elk range is growing, the population is slowly growing, and that is by design of the Pennsylvania Game Commission. The herd is mainly spreading to the east and to the north, and that is by design. Once again, lots of public ground, lots of wilderness, not a lot of people, and great habitat for elk. This bar graph shows you the elk population over the past 13 years. Last year, our population was at 1,497 animals. You can see that the population is slowly growing. Like I said, that is by design. The Pennsylvania Game Commission does not want the elk herd to grow too quickly. That would not be good, because then there would be more sickness, more disease, more starvation, and probably more importantly, perhaps, more human-elk conflict. Pennsylvania Game Commission does do a population count every year, typically during the month of February. It is very accurate today. They use new technology. They actually use an airplane. Takes about 2 weeks. They fly over the elk range at night with a thermal imaging camera mounted on the belly of the airplane. This thermal imaging camera picks up anything that is going to be warm. Elk, of course, being warm-blooded, show up on this thermal imaging camera. And like I said, it is quite accurate. They fly GPS coordinates. And then once they're finished, they go through all of that video footage and they get a very good assessment of the elk population. Based on that elk population each year, the Pennsylvania Game Commission allots a certain number of elk tags for Pennsylvania hunters as well as non-residents to hunt our wonderful resource. Don't worry, Pennsylvania's elk herd is never going to be hunted to extinction again. It is very well managed. They take a look at the population densities in our state, and then they determine how many tags to allot and where to put those tags. I love to hunt. I've hunted all my life. Hunting is very important to conservation in not only putting dollars back into wildlife and back into habitat, but also for the research. All of the elk that are taken within Pennsylvania's elk hunt are checked for diseases such as brucellosis, tuberculosis, brain worm, chronic wasting disease. They are also rump fat index is taken to see how healthy they are going into the winter months. And then also they are aged. A lower incisor is taken. It is cut vertically and they can determine how old the elk is with that tooth. Elk are members of the deer family, also known as the Cervidae family, and they are one of 4 members. In Pennsylvania, we have, of course, white-tailed deer and Rocky Mountain elk. At one time, it was Eastern Woodland Elk. That was the native species. The other 2 members of the deer family are moose, caribou, and reindeer. Caribou and reindeer are actually the same animal. Caribou are wild, while reindeer are domesticated. Like I said, there are different subspecies of elk as well as deer, caribou, reindeer, and moose. I'm going to focus on the 2 we have in our state, Rocky Mountain elk and white-tailed deer. I'm sure that most of you have seen white-tailed deer before, perhaps all of you. There are lots of white-tailed deer in our state as well as neighboring states, and they can actually be found in all 67 counties. Elk and deer are related. You can essentially say they're like cousins, but they are very different as well. I'm going to get into some of these similarities and differences. So let's start with a baby white-tailed deer. A baby white-tailed deer is known as a fawn. Fawns are born typically in May. At birth, they average 7 pounds. White-tailed deer can have up to 4 fawns each spring, although 4 is not common. 2 and 3 is more common. They are born with spots. They use what is called the hider strategy or hider method to survive during those first few weeks of life when they are not very quick on their feet and they are more vulnerable to predators such as black bears and coyotes. Mom does not stay right with their fawn. They do not want to give away the hiding location of their baby fawn. They do check on them 3 to 4 times a day to nurse them milk, which is very high in Clostridium, which is a chemical that is very important to the baby newborn fawn, as far as them growing quickly, growing strong, and also with lots of antibodies. As white-tailed deer grow up, the females are called does, weighing average 100 to 150 pounds in our state of Pennsylvania, and the males are called bucks, weighing 150 to 200 pounds on average in our state. Now I'm going to share with you a baby Rocky Mountain elk, and of course, they are much larger at birth, and then that continues throughout their entire life. I have a newborn elk here. At birth, they average about 35 pounds. Because of their large size, elk only have one baby each year, usually born in June, and they are called calves. They are also born with spots in order to blend in and hide from those same predators, that being black bears and coyotes. The Pennsylvania Game Commission assessed a very cool research project here about 5 years ago on elk calf survival in our state. They worked with Penn State University. It was a 3-year study. What they learned is there's more predation on elk calves than they once thought, and there is more predation on elk calves by black bears than there is by coyotes. As elk grow up, they are much larger. Like I said, average 35 pounds at birth. This is a female, fully grown elk called a cow, and they are going to average 400 to 600 pounds. The males are called bulls. They are much larger, averaging 600 to 900 pounds in our state. Elk are considered grazers, whereas deer are considered browsers. They are both herbivores. They do not eat any meat. Elk, of course, have a lot larger diet than deer do. Deer averaging 3 to 4 pounds of forage each day. Elk anywhere from 10 to 25 pounds of forage each day. Elk have a diet that is very similar to a horse. They eat a lot of different types of grass. Some of their favorites are wheat, oats, alfalfa. They also like forbs, small flowering plants like clover. In the winter months, when there are not a lot of green grasses for the elk to eat, and they still need, that large amount of food each day, they become a little bit more of a browser, and elk will actually eat a lot of bark. They take their lower front incisors and they will strip the bark off of trees, some of their favorites being aspen, willow, and maple. Elk and deer are both ruminants, which means they have a 4-chambered stomach, one of those chambers being the rumen, and that is how they can digest all of these plant materials. Okay, so let's talk about some other comparisons between deer and elk, just to focus on mainly their size differences. This is a track of a white-tailed deer. This is the track of a Rocky Mountain elk. And there is a huge size difference. Both deer and elk do have hooves, which puts them into a special category known as ungulates. This is the lower jawbone from a white-tailed deer, whereas this is the lower jawbone from a Rocky Mountain elk. Both adults, they have similar shaped teeth, lots of sharp molars, and that is because, once again, they are herbivores, they are ruminants, they need to chew up all these plant materials in order to digest them, and then, of course, they regurgitate what they eat, they rechew it, swallow it back down again, and that helps with digestion, often called chewing their cud. This is the shoulder blade or scapula of a white-tailed deer, whereas comparison to a Rocky Mountain elk. You, of course, have 2 scapulas or shoulder blades as well. Yours would be a little bit smaller than that of a white-tailed deer. Okay, let's switch it up here and talk a little bit about horns and antlers. A lot of people, when they're talking about deer or elk or moose or caribou, they talk about their horns. And that is not correct. All members of the deer family do not grow horns. They grow antlers, and antlers and horns are different from one another. There are 3 main differences. First of all, composition. Horns are made out of keratin. That is the same material that makes up your fingernails, toenails, and hair. It is also the same material that hooves and rattlesnake rattles are made of. Antlers are solid bone. This is a bison horn. whereas this is a deer antler. Another difference is horns do not fall off. Animals that grow horns do not shed them. Animals that grow antlers grow a new set of antlers each year. Elk antlers are actually the fastest growing bone tissue in the world. Elk antlers can grow up to 1 inch a day. And because of that, almost miracle, there is some medical research being done to try to help people with bone disease such as osteoporosis. The third difference between antlers and horns is with antlers, only the males grow them, except for caribou and reindeer. Caribou and reindeer females do grow small antlers, but the other 3 members of the deer family, the females do not grow antlers. Horns are grown on both males and females. Let me grab an elk antler here. They grow quite large. This is a large elk antler. It weighs about 12 pounds. And if I were a bull elk, I'd have 2 of these mounted on top of my skull. They would grow from my pedicle, and they would grow rather quickly. They would begin growing typically in April. They would continue growing till August. And while they're growing, they're covered in this soft, fuzzy material called velvet. Velvet protects the antlers while they are growing, and under that velvet, there are thousands of blood vessels carrying nutrients to all parts of the antler, which allows them to grow so quickly. Blood, of course, being very rich. In August, this velvet starts to dry up and peel off, and that's when you see members of the deer family rubbing this velvet on trees and shrubs, revealing the hard, bony, sharp antlers underneath. A lot of people think that elk grow antlers for protection. I'm not saying that they can't be used for protection, but that is not the main purpose of males growing antlers. The main purpose is the breeding season. For elk, it is called the rut, and it takes place in September and October. It is a very exciting time to view elk. If you want a chance of seeing an elk fight, where the bulls are using their antlers to fight for dominance for breeding rights, or if you want to have a very good chance of hearing elk vocalize and talk to one another, making really cool sounds. The cows make mewing sounds and the bulls make bugling sounds. You should come to this part of Pennsylvania in September and October. If you just want to see elk, there is not a bad month. Like I said, though, it doesn't matter which month we're talking about. Elk are crepuscular, and your best odds of catching them are going to be early in the morning or late in the evening. I have a couple of videos to show you of elk fighting with their antlers, with bulls showing off their antlers to try to attract the females, and I'm going to share those with you right now. These videos were taken here in north central Pennsylvania. They are tremendous. So that footage was actually taken right here on this property out in one of the fields. You saw a large group of elk called a herd. You saw some cows, you saw some bulls. The bulls were showing off their antlers, trying to impress the females, and they were talking to one another. I know you couldn't hear the audio, but elk do communicate using vocal sounds, and they are very unique sounds. And like I said, they are best heard during that mating season. Now I'm going to show you a fight between 2 very mature bulls, very impressive bulls. Notice the sizes of their bodies as well as the size of their antlers, and they are fighting for dominance. They are fighting for breeding rights, and this was also taken locally here during the rut. Imagine how exciting that is to see in real person. Two 800, 900-pound animals pushing with their antlers on one another with all of their strength. Sometimes these fights don't last long. Sometimes they last a little bit longer, but they're always exciting. And sometimes two bulls will come together and challenge one another, and there won't even be a fight. One of them will back down prior to the fight after seeing his opponent and thinking that he is not going to be able to overcome him. Now, I always get the question, do they kill each other? That does not happen often. However, injuries do take place quite often. Often they will strain muscles in their hindquarters because they're pushing with their hindquarters on one another. Sometimes one will, actually get a point in the eye or in the face or somewhere in the body. As long as it doesn't puncture an organ, that animal is going to recover quickly. Do elk ever die from these fights during the rut? It does take place, but it is not common. So, a little bit more about the rut, and then I'm going to wrap it up. So the rut, the mating season, like I said, takes place mainly in September and October. When a cow elk comes into estrus or heat, if she is not bred in a 24-hour period, when she comes into estrus, she will come back into heat 21 days later. So even though the majority of elk are going to be bred towards the end of September, there are some cows that are not bred then that will come back into heat in mid-October. And when that happens, of course, you see a spike in activity. You may hear more bugling. Some people like to refer to that as the second rut. We have seen some calves being born later than June because of those cows that are not being bred coming back into heat later. And like I said, they will continue to do that, sometimes even up to 4 or 5 estrus cycles. Pennsylvania's elk herd. I'd like to end with this. It is doing very well. It is growing slowly. I'm not sure what the population count was that just took place. They will let me, they being the Pennsylvania Game Commission, they will share that data with me here soon. And then they will determine how many elk tags to allot for hunters to manage our herd. I feel as though we are very lucky to have elk once again in Pennsylvania, thanks to this successful reintroduction. Other states have taken a look at what Pennsylvania did. Like I said, Kentucky, Missouri, Tennessee, North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, Wisconsin. And they have brought elk back to those states as well, and they are slowly growing. So if you are interested in the Keystone Elk Country Alliance, the Elk Country Visitor Center, or any of our educational opportunities, or you may be interested in supporting our organization, which we have lots of volunteers here at the Elk Country Visitor Center and at our chapters throughout the state, please don't hesitate to get a hold of us here at the Elk Country Visitor Center. Jump on our website, experienceelkcountry.com, and please come visit us here in Benezet at the Elk Country Visitor Center. I thank you for your time. I hope that you can all experience Pennsylvania's wonderful natural resource, and I look forward to the growth of our herd. Have a great day, everybody.
Well, we're not going to let you go yet. We have some questions for you.
Wonderful. I'm ready.
Okay, so you said any time of year is a good time of year to come visit, but when would you recommend people coming, given your experience?
It all depends, Beth, on what they'd like to see. Everybody always talks about the rut, September and October being the best time to see elk. I disagree with that. I think that every month has something to offer. If people would like to see the young, the baby elk calves, nursing from their mothers with the spots, they're going to want to come the latter part of June and July and August. If people want to see huge herds of elk, they're going to want to come during the winter months. That's when the elk herds, grow in numbers. After the rut is over, a lot of the cows and the yearlings and the young bulls will group up, and it's not uncommon to see a herd of over 100 elk. If somebody wants to see these antlers growing and full of, covered in velvet, full of blood, and just impressive with the velvet, they should come during the months of June, July, August. If they want to see the velvet hanging off the antlers, that's a short window. The best time to see that is probably between August 15th and August 25th. That's when most of the bulls are losing that velvet. It happens very quickly. It usually only takes about 3 or 4 days for that to take place. But like I said, a lot of people like to come during the rut because they want to hear the bulls bugle. They want to have a chance at seeing a fight between two huge bulls. And of course, our leaves in this part of Pennsylvania during September and October are nothing short of fantastic.
So tell us a little bit more about the elk life cycle. How long do elk live? And then there was also a question about gestation period for female elk.
Absolutely. So in Pennsylvania, in the wild, our cows are living on average 14 to 16 years, whereas the bulls are living on average 10 to 12 years. Now, I know a lot of people are thinking to themselves, why the difference? It is because of the rut. During the mating season, September and October, 2 months, the bulls are doing a lot of chasing, a lot of fighting, a lot of breeding, and not a lot of eating. This is very hard on their bodies. It is not uncommon for one dominant bull elk to breed up to 50 females in September and October. So they do all of this during the rut, September, October. They wear themselves out, sometimes losing up to 200 pounds of body weight. And then immediately after that, we have winter. And then this part of Pennsylvania, sometimes like this winter, we have harsh winters. Actually, it was about 3 years ago. There was not a lot of food for the elk during the summer months because it was very dry. And then there were not a lot of acorns that year as well, which acorns are wonderful for putting fat on both deer and elk. And then we had a horrendous winter. It was very cold and we had lots of snow. And there were actually some elk that died during the months of March and April, which if you're going to have a winter kill on deer or elk, that is typically when they're going to die would be the months of March and April. Then that's when their bodies are most depleted. So anyways, yeah, those are the age limits or ranges on the bulls and cows and why the difference.
Are elk susceptible to chronic wasting disease?
They are. So chronic wasting disease was first found out west in the 1960s. Any member of the deer family can acquire chronic wasting disease. We know that from other states. In Pennsylvania, there is CWD within our whitetail population. There has not been any elk in Pennsylvania yet to test positive for chronic wasting disease. The Pennsylvania Game Commission does test those elk that are taken during the hunts for chronic wasting disease by taking a sample of their brainstem. There is not a live test at this time for chronic wasting disease, and at this time, chronic wasting disease is always fatal. Chronic wasting disease is found in our deer herd within the elk range, which is a concern. But like I said, thus far, we have not had any elk test positive in our state.
So can you speak a little bit, and we'll make this our last question because we have a lot, but we'll have to get to them a little bit after the program. So can you speak a little bit about the safety between humans and elk? Because I think everyone's excited to come up now, but elk, even though they're herbivores, are still very large animals, and they might not want to eat us, but we do have, humans and elk have contact together. So give us some advice about that.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up, Beth. So in Pennsylvania, of course, thousands and thousands of people come here, mainly during the rut, to see the elk herd, and they come from all over the world. and rightfully so. Our elk here in Pennsylvania are some of the most impressive of that species in the world. Our herd is very healthy. Our herd is very mature. We grow some of the largest bull elk in the world. So there is a campaign that we partner with the Pennsylvania Game Commission as well as other organizations. It is called Elk Smart. What that is how to safely view elk, not only for people, but also for the elk when you come to this part of the state to see this valuable resource. Number one, you want to view them from a safe distance. We recommend keeping 100 yards between you and elk. They can run up to 35 miles per hour. They are wild. A lot of people come here, they see the elk, and they expect them to behave exactly like a white-tailed deer. I will tell you, yes, they are related, but they are not the same animal. I lived in Alaska for 2 years. I will tell you that elk behave more like moose than they do deer. I think that is partially because of their size and partially because they don't have all the predators that white-tailed deer do. So if you see an elk and you think, boy, I'm going to see how close I can get to that elk, that is not a good idea. View it from afar, not only for your safety, but for that of the elk. We don't want the elk in Pennsylvania to get habituated, which means they get used to people, sometimes also called humanization. We do not want people in Pennsylvania to name elk because then they get attached to them. These are wild animals. There is an elk hunting season. When people name elk, they assume that they are not wild. They may do things such as getting too close to them. They may also feed them, which is also not a good idea for a couple reasons. If you feed elk, not only are you habituating them, but you also are causing them to depend on people for food. You may get a lot of elk in one area. In that area, there may not be enough food for the elk. What if that person quits feeding the elk? Also, corn in large quantities is not good for elk. They can acquire something called acid rumidosis, which can actually kill them. So elk smart, be elk smart. When you come to this part of Pennsylvania, respect private landowners' properties. If you are coming to this part of Pennsylvania to look for their antlers, wonderful. Stay on public ground, only go on private ground if you have permission, and do not harass or push the elk. You know, people don't realize, like I said, the elk are very vulnerable, especially when we have hard winters during March and April. Those are the months when the antlers are falling off, and lots of people love coming to look for them. I love doing that as well. If you see elk, though, don't chase them. First of all, it is against the law. You are harassing them, but also you are only doing them harm. So view them from afar and yeah, come and enjoy the elk. Be elk smart, respect our resource, and help keep Pennsylvania's elk wild.
Well, I think you just wrapped it up for me. That's terrific. So I want to thank everyone for your questions. Please contact Ben directly at the Elk Country Visitor Center if you want to learn more. Ben, thank you very much for this presentation.
Thank you. Absolutely. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I hope everybody learned something new, and I hope everybody takes advantage of coming to the Elk Country Visitor Center and our wonderful educational programs. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you so much. Please join us again for more Learn at Lunchtime programs. Visit statemuseumpa.org for program information and to sign up.